I've always had this little ritual of mine, leaving food out behind my apartment for the strays. The city was a harsh place, too much glass and steel, too little kindness, and I figured if I could ease the hunger of a half-starved cat or a limping dog, then maybe I was doing something worthwhile. That night, the bag in my hand was heavier than usual, leftover rice, a bit of chicken, some bread I hadn't touched. I placed it down by the dumpster where the shadows pooled thick, expecting the usual rustle of paws or the cautious glint of feline eyes. But what I heard wasn't the soft pad of animals. It was sharper, hesitant footsteps, like someone unused to walking on hard ground. I turned, slow, and that's when I saw them. 3 figures crouched low, bodies thin and trembling. For a heartbeat I thought they were children, lost or abandoned. Then the light caught them, and my breath stopped. Their skin wasn't quite skin, shimmering faintly as though starlight had seeped into them. Their eyes were too wide, silver pooling where irises should be. They fell on the food with a desperation that made my chest tighten, tearing into bread like they hadn't eaten in days. No words, no hesitation, just raw, animal hunger. One's hand shook so badly the rice spilled everywhere. Another whimpered softly as she chewed. These weren't strays. They weren't human either. They were something else entirely. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I'd just fed the hungry, or opened a door to something far bigger. I froze where I stood, unsure if stepping closer would send them scattering into the night. They reminded me of frightened deer, every muscle wound tight, ready to spring away at the faintest sign of danger. The smallest one kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to come tearing out of the shadows. The pale-haired girl hissed at me, low and guttural, a sound that wasn't human but carried the weight of warning. It wasn't just anger. It was fear disguised as threat. I lifted both hands, palms open, showing I held nothing but air. My voice came out softer than I expected, cracked at the edges. Easy. I won't hurt you. They didn't understand the words. I could tell by the way their brows furrowed, but tone they recognized. The hissing quieted, though none of them looked any less ready to run. That's when I noticed the burns. Ugly, fresh welts spiraling down the arms of the smallest girl, raw and angry against her shimmering skin. She tried to hide them, curling her arms close, but the movement was too slow, too pained. Whoever had done that hadn't been merciful. My chest tightened, a strange mix of pity and anger rising in me. They weren't predators. They weren't monsters. They were broken, wounded, and starving. And when the tallest one met my gaze, those wide, silver eyes searching, measuring, I felt something unspoken pass between us. They weren't just lost. They were running from something. And I had just stepped into their path. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside my window, and all I could see were their faces. Those silver eyes full of suspicion, the way their hands trembled as they ate, the burns wrapped around the smallest one's arms. Logic told me to forget it. Pretend I hadn't seen anything. Aliens? Refugees? Whatever they were, it wasn't my business. Getting involved meant trouble, the kind that didn't just ruin your life but could erase you completely. But no matter how many times I told myself to let it go, the image of them huddled in that alley came back. I'd seen strays before, sure, but animals didn't look at you with haunted eyes that seemed too old for their faces. They weren't scavengers by choice, they were survivors. And survivors didn't last long on empty stomachs. The following night, I carried food again. This time, my hands shook as much as theirs had. When I reached the alley, they were already waiting, shadows pressed tight against the wall, alert but unmoving. They hadn't run. That alone told me something had shifted. I set the bag down slowly, but instead of leaving, I crouched low, keeping my movements measured, deliberate. They froze, whispers flickering between them in a language I couldn't grasp. And then, the tallest of the three finally broke the silence, her voice rough, each word fractured like it had been borrowed from memory. Why? Help. Her name was Syrah. She was the one who spoke, halting and broken, her words heavy with effort as if every syllable cut against her throat. The pale-haired one, Laya, hardly spoke at all, but her watchful eyes missed nothing. And the smallest, Nira, barely whispered, her voice a fragile thing, like glass ready to shatter. Bit by bit, through scraps of English, hand gestures, and the universal language of hunger, I began to piece together their story. They weren't from here. That much was obvious, but hearing it confirmed made my skin prickle. Their ship had fallen, somewhere far from the city, torn apart in the sky. Most of their people hadn't survived the crash. The few that had were taken, captured by something, or someone, they called hunters. The word was thick with fear, spat out like poison. Syrah's hands shook when she spoke of it. Lia clutched nearer close whenever her burns were mentioned, as though the memory alone might summon the pain back. They hadn't chosen Earth as a refuge. Earth was just where the wreckage had spit them out. They were fugitives in a world that didn't even know they existed. What struck me hardest was how young they were. Stripped of their strange features and luminous skin, they weren't much older than teenagers. Kids, really, forced into running from a war I couldn't begin to imagine. When Nira finally lifted her burned arm and whispered that single word, hunters, I felt something cold settle in my gut. Whoever they were running from, they weren't human. At first, I thought they were just jumpy, reacting to every creak and shadow because of what they'd been through. Trauma leaves its marks, and they wore it plain as day. But the longer I spent with them, the more I realized their fear wasn't just memory, it was anticipation. Syrah kept glancing at the rooftops, her gaze sharp, as if expecting shapes to drop down from the dark. Lia flinched whenever the air hummed with a distant buzz of traffic. And Nira clung to her sister's sleeve with wide, unblinking eyes, like she could feel danger before it came. Then one night, I heard it too. A low hum that didn't belong to any car, steady and mechanical, vibrating through the bones. Lights flickered across the far edge of the sky, not the sweeping beam of a helicopter, but something tighter, more controlled, searching. I froze in the alley, the girls pressed against the wall behind me, trembling. That's when I saw it. A figure at the mouth of the alley, too tall, too broad, its movements wrong, jerky, like a shadow stretched over armor. For a heartbeat its eyes glowed red, a sharp glint in the dark. And then it was gone, vanishing as if it had never been there. They found us, Lia whispered, her broken English barely holding together. Her voice cracked on the last word. Hunters, come. The food in my hand suddenly felt meaningless. I understood then. I hadn't just stumbled into their lives. I'd stumbled into their war. I spent hours wrestling with myself, the weight of choice pressing harder than anything I'd carried before. I could walk away, pretend none of this ever touched me. Let the hunters reclaim their prey, because what was I compared to whatever monsters had burned nearer and hunted their kind across the stars? I was just a man. One man. Not trained, not armed, not ready. Every sensible part of me screamed to stay out of it. But then I'd look at them, 3 girls who had no one else. Syrah, forcing herself to stand tall even when fear hollowed her eyes. Lia, shielding her sisters with a fierceness that felt far older than her years. And Nira, silent, fragile, clutching at the hem of her sister's sleeve like it was the last tether to life itself. They didn't need a soldier. They needed someone who wouldn't abandon them. So I made my choice. I gathered what I could. Cans of food, blankets, an old first aid kit, a flashlight. I cleared a storage space in the basement of my building, a place I hadn't stepped into for years, dusty but hidden. It wasn't much, but it was safer than an open alley. When the humming engines returned, when strange shadows stretched long across the city streets, I stood in front of them. My hands trembled, my pulse thundered in my ears, but I didn't move aside. Not this time, I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. If the universe wanted them, it would have to go through me first. They came with the morning light, slipping through the veil of dawn like shadows given form. 3 of them, tall and lean, their shapes bending in ways that felt wrong to the eye, like reality hadn't been built to contain them. Their armor glistened as if it was part of their flesh, and when their eyes lit red, the air itself seemed to grow colder. To them, I wasn't even a consideration. Just a man. Just a human. Weak. Insignificant. They moved toward the girls, their hands stretching with that alien precision, and something inside me snapped. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I acted. The rusted length of pipe in my grip felt pitiful compared to what they carried, but adrenaline made it heavy, solid, righteous. I swung, the clang of metal on alien plating echoing in the alley. One of them staggered back, more surprised than hurt. Pain came fast, blows that sent fire through my ribs, sparks dancing in my vision. But I didn't stop. I roared, again and again, swinging until my arms shook, until I tasted blood in my mouth. And then something shifted. Not in me, but in them. The hunters stepped back. Not retreating out of defeat, but out of something colder. Caution. Confusion. Because I hadn't broken. When they vanished into the light, the girls rushed to me, clinging, whispering words I didn't fully understand but felt in my bones. Gratitude. Trust. Family. Maybe I couldn't fight their war. But that day, in that alley, humanity had drawn its line. And I knew the universe would never forget it.